Strangers are floating over my bedroom every weekend. In a chairlift the HOA built over my roof without asking me. Not a ski resort. My private cabin. My family's land for 60 years. She pushed through a board vote, filed a permit, hired her brother-in-law's construction company, strung steel cable directly over my roof line. No individual notice, no compensation. Then she mailed me a bill, $1,900, charging me for the cable bolted above my own bedroom. Every weekend, 60 strangers rode past my windows in open chairs. Some had binoculars, pointing down at my yard like it was part of the tour. My grandfather built this cabin in 1962, with a handsaw and no running water. I re-chinked these logs myself every summer. She picked the wrong cabin, and she was about to find out exactly why. What would you do if an HOA claimed the sky above your home? Drop a pin. Where are you watching from? My name is Weston Dre. I'm 58 years old, retired civil engineer, third-generation mountain man, and before I tell you what I did, you need to understand what this place means to me. My grandfather, Harlan Dre Sr., bought 12 acres on a ridge in the Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina in 1962. He paid cash, $420, money he'd saved working double shifts at a textile mill in Asheville. He built a one-room shelter that first summer, with a handsaw, a hammer, and a borrowed mule to haul timber up the ridge. No electricity, no running water, just a man who wanted a piece of ground that was permanently, irrevocably his. My father expanded it, added 2 rooms, a covered porch, a root cellar. I grew up spending summers here, barefoot on pine needles, drinking from a spring-fed gravity system my father engineered himself. The cabin smells like cedar and cold stone, even in July. The gravel driveway crunches like cornmeal under boot heels. Every board, every log, every copper pipe fitting has a name attached to it. Somebody in my family put it there. I spent 11 summers of my adult life maintaining this place, replacing the roof, re-chinking the log walls, running new copper pipe when the old galvanized started to go. This is not a vacation property to me. This is the most important piece of real estate on earth. Then in 2009, the valley below my ridge was purchased by a development company. They platted 42 vacation homes and imposed a homeowners association, the Ridgecrest Mountain Owners Collective, RMOC. My parcel predated their entire development by 47 years, but because my driveway ran through a shared access easement, I was technically absorbed into their jurisdiction. I paid my dues. I showed up to meetings. I mostly kept quiet. That changed when Marjorie Foss got elected board president in 2019. Marjorie was a retired corporate attorney from Charlotte, early 60s. Second home, full-time attitude. She showed up to every meeting in a fleece vest, sat at the head of the table, and ran RMOC with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting their entire adult life for exactly this much power. She had a gavel. She used it, frequently. In spring of 2022, Foss pushed through a measure designating the ridge above the development a scenic corridor, and buried inside that measure was an easement for a planned community chairlift to give residents panoramic mountain views. The vote passed 11-3. I voted no. My property sat directly under the proposed route. I was not individually notified. The board's legal position was that my driveway easement gave RMOC right-of-way over the corridor, including, apparently, the sky above it. By August, they drove anchor posts. One landed 40 feet from my cabin wall. Steel cable was tensioned over my roofline at 22 feet. By October, the chairlift was operational. Friday through Sunday, 9 to 5. Open chairs, 4 passengers each. The motor hummed at the upper terminal, the cable whirred, and strangers drifted over my property all weekend long. My neighbor Clyde Ott, a retired surveyor who'd watched the whole construction from his porch with narrowed eyes, pulled me aside the day it opened. He ground his jaw for a moment and said, "Weston, I don't think they can legally do that." I knew he was right. I just didn't know yet how right. The first weekend the chairlift ran, my wife Dot stood at the kitchen window and watched a family of tourists float past at eye level. Slowly, leisurely. The mother pointed at Dot's herb garden. The father said something and they both laughed. Dot turned from the window, set down her coffee, looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. "Fix this," she said. I nodded. "I will." I didn't start with speakers. I started with a letter. I'm an engineer. I believe in documentation, process, and giving people exactly one clean opportunity to do the right thing before you make their lives complicated. So, I drafted a formal written objection, 3 pages, single-spaced, certified mail, citing 3 specific concerns. First, trespass of airspace above my private parcel. Second, loss of quiet enjoyment of my property. Third, failure to provide individual written notice to directly affected landowners before filing the construction permit. It took me 2 weekends to write. It was precise, professional, and completely ignored. Marjorie Foss sent back a single paragraph on RMOC letterhead, signed in green ink. She cited a clause in the original CC and Rs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions governing the development, that granted the board authority over shared infrastructure serving the collective scenic and recreational experience of the community. She noted the chairlift would increase property values across the development, which would benefit me. She used the phrase, "We appreciate your concerns," twice. She did not address the airspace question at all. I read it standing at my kitchen counter. Then I read it again. Then I set it down and looked out the window at the cable running over my roof line, catching afternoon light like a wire strung across a painting that didn't belong there. Fine. We'd do this the other way. I drove to the Haywood County Planning Department and asked to review the permit file for the RMOC chairlift installation. The permit had been issued based on RMOC's representation that all affected landowners had been individually notified. I had never received formal written notification, not a letter, not a phone call, not a knock on the door. The planning officer, a young woman named Talia, maybe 30, who had the look of someone processing her 14th frustrating conversation of the week, pulled up the file, scrolled through it, and went very quiet for a moment. Then she looked at me over her computer screen and said, "Mr. Dre, I can see there's a discrepancy." She filed an internal flag that afternoon. The county sent RMOC a letter requesting clarification. I drove home feeling, for the first time since October, like the ground was slightly more solid under my feet. That feeling lasted about 2 weeks. Then, RMOC filed a noise complaint against me. My generator, the same propane generator I'd run for 11 years to power the cabin off-grid, the one that sat behind a sound-baffled shed I'd built specifically to minimize its footprint, was suddenly in violation of amended RMOC quiet hour standards. No prior warning. No grace period. The amended standard had been passed at a board meeting held with 24 hours notice, the bare legal minimum under the bylaws. 3 people attended that meeting. One of them was Foss. She was also the one who called the vote. I'll give her credit for creativity. I genuinely will. I responded the way any engineer with 11 years of documentation habits would respond. I pulled out my phone, downloaded a decibel meter app, and spent the following 2 weekends recording every noise source on and around my property. My generator, the chairlift motor at the upper terminal, the cable whir, the passengers talking as they passed overhead. I compiled the readings into a table, attached them to a formal written response, and submitted everything to the county alongside my objection to the noise complaint. The county put both items under review. 2 weeks later, the complaint against me was quietly dropped. The chairlift noise issue went into a filing cabinet, where I strongly suspected it would be useful later. Takeaway 1. Document everything from day 1. Dates, times, decibel readings, certified mail receipts. Because in any HOA dispute, the person with the better paper trail almost always wins. Then came the bill. October, end of the chairlift's first season. My quarterly RMOC statement arrived with a new line item printed in the same bland font as the trash collection fee. Scenic chairlift infrastructure. Special assessment. $1,847. I was being charged for the construction of a system built over my home without my consent, using an easement that, in my increasingly firm legal opinion, didn't cover airspace at all. I set the statement on the kitchen table. Dot read it. Picked it up. Set it back down, picked up her coffee. Then she said, very quietly, "Weston, get a lawyer." I already had someone in mind. Harlan Pruitt has been practicing general law out of a 2-room office in Waynesville, North Carolina for 38 years. He handles wills, property disputes, small business contracts, the kind of work that holds mountain communities together without anyone noticing. He wears the same khaki jacket to every meeting. He chews peppermint gum constantly. He speaks slowly and says things like, "Let's look at the documents." He is, in my experience, the most dangerous kind of attorney, the one who is never in a hurry. Harlan pulled the original 1962 deed and plat for my grandfather's parcel. Then he pulled the 2003 easement agreement my father had signed, granting shared driveway access across the lower corner of our property. He read both documents twice, chewed his gum, then he looked up. "This easement is a surface easement," he said. "Ground level only. There is no language here conveying any rights to airspace, subsurface, or anything above grade. Here's the legal concept that changes everything, and it's older than the United States itself. Under common law, there's a Latin principle. Cuius est solum, eius est usque ad colum et ad inferos. Whoever owns the soil owns everything upward to the sky and downward to the depths. My grandfather's deed conveyed the full property column, surface, subsurface, and airspace. The 2003 easement my father signed carved out a thin horizontal slice at ground level for a shared driveway. That was all it conveyed, nothing above it. The chairlift cable, running 22 feet above my roofline, was passing through my privately owned airspace without any legal authority to be there. Takeaway 2. A surface easement does not automatically grant airspace rights. If a structure crosses your private airspace without a specific airspace easement, the property owner has a legitimate trespass claim. Then Harlan read the CC and R clause Foss had cited in her green ink letter. The scenic corridor language. He read it 3 times, slowly, the way he reads everything. Then he set it down and said, "Marjorie wrote this clause herself, didn't she?" It wasn't a question. The clause was vague to the point of being meaningless. It authorized shared infrastructure serving the collective scenic and recreational experience, but never defined what infrastructure could traverse individual private parcels. It was a rubber stamp dressed up as a legal basis. Harlan shook his head slightly, which for him was the equivalent of anyone else laughing out loud. He sent RMOC a formal demand letter, certified mail, return receipt. It laid out the airspace trespass, the improper special assessment, the defective notification process, and made 3 specific demands: immediate suspension of chairlift operations pending legal review, removal of the special assessment from my billing, and formal negotiation of a voluntary airspace easement with fair compensation if RMOC wished to continue operating the system. RMOC's response arrived 3 weeks later, 20 pages. A Charlotte firm called Baines and Whitlow, dense legal language arguing that the CC and Rs, properly interpreted, granted the board authority to install community infrastructure, and that my integration into the RMOC service area constituted implied consent to community development. The letter was designed to be exhausting. It probably cost the HOA $4,000 in legal fees to produce. The rest of the homeowners paid for it through their dues, which I suspect most of them didn't know. That fall, my neighbor Burl Casto knocked on my door on a Saturday morning. Burl was a retired firefighter, wide shoulders, flannel shirt, the kind of man who fixes things rather than talks about them. He'd heard about the attorney letters through the Valley grapevine. He stood on my porch and said, "They spent $4,000 of our money to defend a chairlift that runs 3 days a week?" I said, "That's about the size of it." He scratched the back of his neck. "That doesn't seem right." I offered him coffee. He accepted. We sat on the porch and watched a chairlift car drift overhead. A couple inside, both looking at their phones, completely unaware they were floating over a property dispute. The cable made a low, musical hum in the cold air. Burl watched the car clear the tree line and disappear toward the upper terminal. "What do you need?" he said. I thought about it for a moment. "Not yet," I said, "but soon." On Harlan's advice, I sent RMOC a formal written notice that I was withholding the $1,847 chairlift assessment, not ignoring it, not refusing it, formally disputing it in writing within the 60-day window provided under North Carolina HOA law, a window that strips the HOA of its ability to immediately pursue collection or file a lien while the dispute is active. Takeaway 3. Under North Carolina General Statute Section 47F-3-116, A homeowner who formally disputes an HOA assessment in writing, within 60 days, removes the immediate threat of lien and collection. Filing on day 59, as Harlan did, is not procrastination, it's strategy. RMOC responded with a lien threat anyway. A letter arrived saying failure to pay would result in a lien against my property within 90 days. It was legally premature. The dispute was properly filed, and they knew it. Dot called Harlan the morning the letter arrived. He listened, then said, in his unhurried way, "They can't do that yet. We filed the dispute. They know that." He paused. "They're trying to scare you." Another pause. "It won't work." He sounded almost pleased. That was unusual for Harlan, and I took it as a good sign. Meanwhile, the county planning flag that Talia had filed back in October had worked its way up the chain to the county engineer's office. A new inquiry landed on RMOC's desk. The original permit application had listed 0 directly affected private parcels in the chairlift's path. My cabin was, demonstrably, in its path. This was a potential permit irregularity, the kind that triggers either a stop work order or a full permit amendment process requiring new public notice and individual notifications. The chairlift kept running, but the ground under it was getting softer. I decided it was time to let the other homeowners know what was happening. I drafted a factual, measured email. No editorializing, no name-calling, just a clear timeline. The vote, the construction, the airspace issue, the improper assessment, the county permit discrepancy, and copies of the key documents attached as PDFs. I sent it to every RMOC member whose email address I had, 37 households. I sent it on a Sunday evening. By Monday morning, I had 19 replies, 14 supportive, 3 neutral, 2 hostile, both from people I'd never met who'd bought their lots in the last 18 months and had no idea any of this was happening. More importantly, Burl went to work. He printed the email, put it in a plastic sleeve, it was raining, and walked door to door on the west slope. He got 6 more signatures on a support letter within 2 days. The smell of wet pine followed him home. A woman named Cecilia Vance, who'd owned a lot on the east slope for 12 years and had served 2 terms on the RMOC board before resigning in frustration, called me directly. "I've been waiting for someone to do this for 2 years, she said. "What do you need?" Foss responded to the email with her own message to the community list. She described my communication as legally misleading and divisive. She cited an internal HOA estimate, claiming the chairlift had increased assessed property values by an average of 8%. She referred to me as part of a small number of dissatisfied residents, a phrase that landed poorly with people who knew that my family had been on this ridge since before the development company had even filed its plat. She did not mention the airspace issue. She did not mention the permit discrepancy. She did not mention that the county had an active inquiry on her desk. That was the moment I understood something important about Marjorie Foss. She wasn't just aggressive, she was a selective communicator. She only ever shared the facts that helped her, and buried the ones that didn't, which meant that as long as the other homeowners were getting their information exclusively from her, she had complete control of the narrative. So I walked out to my grandfather's workshop at the back of the property that weekend. The place smelled of old motor oil, sawdust, and the cold metallic tang of tools that had been hanging on the same hooks for 40 years. Burl had helped me haul in 4 components the previous weekend. Nothing was assembled yet, but I stood there for a long time, looking at the parts, thinking about what a civil engineer knows about sound, about resonance, about the acoustic signature of structural failure. Then I called Harlan. "I think it's time to be less quiet," I said. "I agree," he said. "Let's build the case." Harlan had filed a public records request with Haywood County for every document related to the RMOC chairlift permit, application, supporting materials, correspondence, and any internal county review notes. Standard procedure. These requests typically take 30 days. Ours came back in 14. 312 pages, delivered as a digital packet. Most of it was boilerplate, standard engineering diagrams, contractor insurance certificates, municipal processing forms. I read through it on a Tuesday night at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold somewhere around page 150. On page 218, I stopped. It was a letter from the RMOC board to the Haywood County Planning Department, dated March 2022, signed by Marjorie Foss in her capacity as board president. The letter certified, in plain, unambiguous language, that all private property owners whose parcels intersect the proposed chairlift corridor have been individually notified and have provided written acknowledgement. I had never signed anything. I had never received written notice. I had never provided written acknowledgement of any kind. Marjorie Foss had told the county, in writing, under the standards of a government permit application, that I had been notified and had acknowledged the project, and neither of those things was true. I sat with that for a moment. The fireplace was going. The cabin was warm. Outside, the chairlift cable was still and silver in the cold night. Then I kept reading. On page 241, there were the minutes from the RMOC board session, at which the chairlift construction contract had been awarded. The contract went to a company called Ridgecrest Summit Builds LLC. I wrote the name down. The following morning, Cecilia Vance ran a corporate records search on her laptop. It took her 8 minutes. Ridgecrest Summit Builds LLC was registered to a holding company whose principal officer was a man named Denton Foss, Marjorie Foss's brother-in-law. The contract had been awarded to a family member's company, at a board meeting where Marjorie Foss had voted yes, without any disclosed conflict of interest. I called Harlan. It was 10 at night. He answered on the second ring, which told me he'd been waiting for this call. I read him both findings. He was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a man doing rapid legal arithmetic in his head. Then he said very evenly, "Weston, they gave us the whole thing. Here is why that matters practically, not just morally. Under North Carolina HOA law, board members owe a fiduciary duty to the homeowners they serve. Voting to award a contract to a family member's company without disclosing that relationship isn't just ethically wrong. It's a potential breach of fiduciary duty that can void the contract, expose the board member to personal liability, and form the basis of a formal complaint to the North Carolina Real Estate Commission." Takeaway 4. HOA board members in North Carolina carry fiduciary responsibilities. Awarding contracts to undisclosed family members can invalidate those contracts and trigger personal liability, not just a slap on the wrist. And the false certification to the county was a separate problem entirely. Filing materially false representations in support of a government permit application is not a technicality. It's the kind of finding that makes government agencies very interested, very quickly. I sat on my porch that night and looked at the cable for a long time. The mountain was quiet. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like a man who had just found load-bearing rot in a wall someone had told him was solid. What I did next would determine everything. Harlan gave me the option of a private settlement, take a negotiated payment, accept a formal airspace easement, make the special assessment disappear, sign something and move on. I thought about it for exactly 1 weekend. Then I called him back. "No," I said, "I want this done in the open. I want every homeowner in this development to know what their dues paid for." Harlan was quiet for a moment. Then, "All right, let's build the trap." We had 4 components to assemble. The first was the legal filing. Harlan prepared formal complaints to the North Carolina Real Estate Commission and the State HOA Dispute Resolution Office. The complaints cited Foss's false certification to the county, the undisclosed conflict of interest in the construction contract, and the improper special assessment. These weren't lawsuits. They were regulatory filings, which meant they created an official state record, one that couldn't be quietly walked back after a board election or a private settlement, one that would exist regardless of what happened next. Filing with state regulatory bodies rather than just local courts puts HOA misconduct into a record that survives membership changes and outlasts any individual dispute. The second component was the homeowner coalition. Cecilia Vance agreed to co-author a petition requesting a special membership meeting, the formal mechanism under RMOC's own bylaws for homeowners to challenge board actions. The CC and Rs required signatures from 15% of lot owners to force the meeting. We needed 7 households. We had 22 signed within a week. Burl went door to door on the west slope in the rain with a printed petition in a plastic sleeve and came back with 6 more. On a Tuesday evening, Cecilia submitted the petition to the RMOC board by certified mail. We had our meeting. The third component was the media. Cecilia had spent 12 years as a reporter for a regional paper before retiring to the mountains. She reached out to a journalist named Darius Patel at the Asheville Citizen-Times, who covered local government and land use with the particular patience of someone who understood that the most important stories usually lived in permit files and meeting minutes. She gave him the public records documents. She gave him the conflict of interest finding. She told him to mark his calendar for the special membership meeting. Patel said he'd be there. The fourth component was mine alone. I'm a civil engineer. I spent 30 years designing load-bearing structures, mechanical systems, acoustic environments. I had spent the past month studying the chairlift, its motor hum frequency at the upper terminal, the resonance profile of steel cable under load tension, the specific creak signature of the anchor bracket hardware. I knew exactly what this system sounded like under normal operation. More importantly, I knew what it would sound like if something were wrong. In my grandfather's workshop, smelling of sawdust, motor oil, and decades of honest work, I assembled a system of 4 weatherproof outdoor speakers, mounted discreetly under the cabin eaves, wired to a small amplifier, and a laptop running audio sequencing software. The audio files I'd built were carefully layered from public domain engineering recordings. A low structural groan building in pitch, a sharp metallic pop like a bolt releasing under sheer stress, a sustained rising creak, then the specific harmonic signature of cable tension failing. The whole sequence ran 93 seconds. The critical technical details. The speakers were aimed directly upward, toward the cable, toward the passing chairs, not outward, toward neighbors. The volume was calibrated to match the chairlift's own operational noise level at 22 feet. The trigger was wireless from my phone, and every component was installed on my private property, aimed at a structure passing through my private airspace. I had consulted with Harlan on the legal parameters. We were in carefully calculated gray zone territory. My speakers were on my land. They produced no more noise than the chairlift's own motor, and they were responding to a structure that had no legal right to be above my home in the first place. Burl would be positioned at the upper terminal on the day of the meeting with his wildlife camera. The good one. The one he used for bear monitoring, with the long-range microphone. Whatever happened, there would be footage. I stood in the workshop doorway on the last night of preparation and looked up at the cable in the moonlight. My dog Luther sat beside me, ears up, reading the night air for things I couldn't perceive. "Almost," I said. Luther wagged once and went inside. Foss found out about the petition within 48 hours. I don't know exactly how. The development has the gossip circulation of a small town, which is to say immediate and total. Her response was fast and, I'll admit, tactically intelligent. She called an emergency board session, 24 hours notice, the minimum allowed, and pushed through a motion to review and potentially amend the bylaw provisions governing special membership meetings. Specifically, she wanted to raise the signature threshold required to force a meeting from 15% to 25%, retroactively. While our petition was sitting on the board's desk, 3 board members voted yes, 2 voted no, 1 abstained and afterwards sent Cecilia a text that said simply, "I'm sorry, I felt pressured." Harlan filed an immediate objection with the HOA Dispute Resolution Office the following morning. His argument was clean. Amending a procedural bylaw in direct response to an active petition with the evident purpose of defeating that petition is textbook bad faith. And North Carolina courts have consistently held that retroactive bylaw changes cannot be applied to nullify a petition properly filed under the previous rules. The amendment was a paper tiger. Foss had spent political capital on a move that wasn't going to work, and Harlan's filing made sure the record reflected exactly what she'd tried to do. Then she went personal. Over the following week, Foss contacted at least 3 households who hadn't signed the petition, by phone, personally, not through official RMOC channels. She told them that I was attempting to expose the community to legal liability by challenging the chairlift. She implied I was trying to have the structure removed entirely, which would cost the HOA significant money and decrease property values. She framed my legal filings not as a homeowner exercising legitimate rights, but as a malicious attack on the community. It was a smart message, technically. It contained just enough truth to be plausible, and just enough distortion to be dangerous. But Foss had made a miscalculation. A retired schoolteacher named Verna Pell had a habit of recording her phone calls, 20 years of it, for personal reference, because her memory had gotten unreliable and she liked having a record. She recorded Foss's call. She listened to it again afterward, and somewhere in the middle of a paragraph about legal liability and property values, Foss had said, in the comfortable, candid tone of a private conversation, "Between us, the notification paperwork was a little thin. The lawyers are handling it." Verna listened to that part 3 times. Then she called Cecilia. "I'm sending you something," she said. That recording went into the file alongside the permit documents. Then Foss tried a different approach with me directly. A personal letter arrived at the cabin, hand-delivered, not on RMOC letterhead, no attorney copied. She offered to remove the special assessment, adjust the chairlift schedule to exclude Sunday mornings before 11, and provide me with a community liaison stipend of $3,000 per year. In exchange, I would drop all legal challenges and sign a non-disclosure agreement. I read it standing at my kitchen counter, handed it to Dot without saying anything. She read it, set it down, and said, "She's scared." I said, "I know." I texted Harlan. She just offered me an NDA. His reply took 40 seconds. "Don't sign a single word. That offer just told us everything we need to know about what she thinks her exposure is." I put the letter in the file folder with everything else and went out to the workshop. Meanwhile, Darius Patel called me on a Wednesday evening. He'd reviewed all the documents. He'd contacted Haywood County for comment. They'd confirmed the permit discrepancy was under active review. He asked me one question. "Is there going to be anything worth documenting at this special meeting?" I looked out the kitchen window at the cable over my roofline, silver in the early dark of a November evening. The chairlift was still. The anchor post sat 40 feet from my wall, solid in the cold ground. "Yeah," I said, "there is." He said he'd bring a photographer. I went back to the workshop. Luther followed me in and settled on the old rug by the door. I ran one final calibration on the speaker system: volume, trigger response, directional aim. Everything checked. I covered the equipment with a canvas drop cloth and turned off the light. The workshop smelled of motor oil and sawdust, and the particular cold of a mountain night coming through the gaps in the siding. It was almost time. The special membership meeting was set for a Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock. The RMOC Community Center, a barn-style building at the valley floor with exposed timber beams and folding chairs that scraped the concrete floor when you moved them. Cecilia had drafted the agenda, a homeowner presentation on the chairlift's legal history, followed by a membership vote on whether to formally censure the current board and suspend chairlift operations pending independent legal review. 41 of the 42 property owners had confirmed attendance. The 42nd was Marjorie Foss, who responded via her attorney. 2 days before the meeting, Baines and Whitlow filed an emergency motion in Haywood County Superior Court seeking a temporary restraining order to block the meeting. Their argument was that the petition process had been procedurally defective, specifically that signatures had been collected informally rather than on the official RMOC petition form. It was filed at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, a move clearly designed to cause maximum chaos with minimum time to respond. Harlan drove to the courthouse, filed a response in under 90 minutes, and got on the docket for a Saturday morning emergency hearing. He brought 3 items: the original CC and RS showing no requirement for an official form, proof every signature had been collected with proper notice of purpose, and the North Carolina appellate case establishing that retroactive bylaw amendments couldn't invalidate a valid petition. The hearing lasted 11 minutes. Judge Elmore, matter of fact, reading glasses low on her nose, denied the TRO without extended comment. She looked at the Baines and Whitlow associate over her glasses and said, "Counsel, this meeting will proceed as scheduled." The associate said nothing. Harlan drove home and ate lunch. That Saturday afternoon, I ran a final test on the speaker system. Low volume, just enough to confirm the trigger chain was live. I stood on the porch, opened my phone, tapped the sequence. The groan began, low and directional, rising from under the eaves toward the cable above. Then the metallic pop, then the creak. Luther came sprinting around the corner of the cabin, ears up, scanning the cable with intense professional concern. He stood there for 3 full seconds, reading the structure above him, then relaxed when he found nothing actually wrong. Tail moving, looking at me. "Good boy," I said. Tomorrow. He went back to whatever he'd been doing. Dogs are remarkably good at compartmentalizing. Burl had his wildlife camera positioned at the upper chairlift terminal by 7 the next morning. Tripod, long-range microphone, full battery, clear line of sight south-southwest down the cable to my cabin, 800 meters below. He had a thermos of black coffee and a folding chair. He'd tested the microphone range the previous afternoon by having his wife call his name from 50 feet away. The camera had picked her up clearly. Burl was nothing if not thorough. Darius Patel arrived at the community center by 9. He had his notebook, his audio recorder, and a photographer named Sela who moved quietly and positioned herself without being asked. Patel had covered local government for 11 years. He had the specific, patient alertness of someone who has learned that the most important moments in a story usually happen in the 10 minutes before or after everyone is paying attention. The chairlift ran its regular Sunday morning service, 9 to 12, the last session before the 2 o'clock meeting. Foss had authorized it. Whether that was defiance, indifference, or a miscalculation of spectacular proportions, I genuinely cannot say. But the motor hummed to life at the lower terminal at 9 sharp, and the first chair lifted from the platform and began its slow arc toward my ridge. I was on my porch, phone in hand, Luther at my feet. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of Blue Ridge November morning where the air has a particular clean edge to it, and every sound carries farther than it should. I confirmed Burl's position through my binoculars. Camera up, lens trained down ridge. I looked toward the community center road and found Patel's car in the lot, 800 meters below. I set the binoculars down. Dot came out with 2 coffees. She handed me one and stood beside me. We watched the first chair ascending the cable, small in the distance, growing closer. She didn't say anything, neither did I. The coffee was hot. The cable hummed in the cold air. And somewhere in the county courthouse system, there was a document that said Marjorie Foss had certified I'd consented to all of this. I picked up my phone. The first chair cleared my roofline at 9:17. 4 passengers, 2 adults, 2 teenagers. The teenagers were taking photos of the mountain view to the north. One of the adults was pointing at something in the middle distance. Nobody was looking down. Then the sound began rising from below them, from under my eaves, aimed directly upward at the cable and the chair passing above. A low structural groan. Not loud, about the volume of a diesel engine idling a block away, but directional and immediate, and carrying the specific acoustic signature I had spent 3 weeks calibrating to match this exact structure. Then a sharp metallic pop, the sound of a bolt releasing under sheer stress. Then the creak, rising in pitch, sustained. The particular harmonic that every human nervous system has been calibrated by millions of years of evolution to recognize as something large and load-bearing that is failing. The sequence built over 15 seconds. One of the teenagers grabbed the chair frame with both hands. The adult man stood up involuntarily, the pure reflex of a person whose body decided to act before his brain had finished processing, and then sat down hard. The woman said one word that Burl's microphone caught with perfect clarity from 800 meters away. Stop. The chair rocked from the sudden movement. It kept moving. Nothing had actually failed. No cable had snapped. No bracket had sheared. But for approximately 20 seconds, 4 people in an open chair 22 feet above my roofline had experienced the specific, vivid, full-body terror of a structural emergency over a mountain valley. The second chair was already ascending. The passengers in the first chair, clearing the cabin and catching their breath, were gesturing back urgently, pointing downward. The lower terminal operator had his radio up before the first chair reached the midpoint. The motor cut. Both chairs stopped, swinging gently on the stationary cable in the November air. The lower terminal operator ran to the anchor post on my property line and began inspecting it. He found nothing wrong. He looked up at the cable. Normal tension. Normal hardware. He called the upper terminal. He called the main operator line. He followed every protocol he was supposed to follow, because he was a conscientious employee who had heard something that concerned him and responded correctly. RMOC suspended chairlift operations pending structural inspection. The chairs hung still over my ridge. The cable caught morning light. Burl called me at 9:24. I got all of it, he said. Every second. Come to the meeting, I said. By 2 o'clock, the community center was full in a way it had never been full before. every RMOC property owner. Some had brought neighbors from outside the development. Folding chairs were borrowed from the adjacent storage room and arranged in extra rows. The ceiling beams absorbed the low murmur of 40 conversations happening at once. Foss sat at the headboard table with her, Baines and Whitlow attorney beside her. She had arranged the table to face the room. She looked composed. She had spent 30 years in corporate law and knew how to hold a room. Cecilia opened with the presentation, methodical, documented, the airspace trespass argument, the improper special assessment, the county permit discrepancy. Each item sourced to a specific document, projected from a laptop onto the pull-down screen at the front of the room. The room was quiet, in the way rooms go quiet when people are hearing things they sense they should have known sooner. Then Cecilia played the recording, Verna Pell's kitchen phone recording, in clear domestic audio. Marjorie Foss's voice, comfortable and candid. Between us, the notification paperwork was a little thin. The lawyers are handling it. The room stayed very quiet. The Baines and Whitlow associates stood and began objecting. Inadmissible, improper, taken out of context. A retired judge named Emmett Doyle, sitting in the third row in a canvas jacket, turned and said, calmly and with complete finality, "This is not a court. Sit down." He sat down. Then I stood up. I held one document, page 218 of the county permit file. I held it up so the room could see it. "This is a letter Marjorie Foss signed and submitted to Haywood County," I said. "It certifies that I was individually notified of the Chairlift project and provided written acknowledgement. I never received notice. I never signed anything. I never acknowledged this project." I set the document on the table in front of me. "I am not trying to destroy this community. I am trying to protect the integrity of property rights, mine and yours. Because if the board can do this to my parcel, they can do it to any parcel in this development." The room voted 34-7 to suspend the chairlift and formally request the board president's resignation. Patel was writing. His photographer was shooting, and Marjorie Foss, for the first time in the 3 years I had known her, had nothing to say. Marjorie Foss submitted her resignation from the RMOC board 5 days after the meeting. The letter cited personal reasons. It was 3 sentences long and signed without the green ink. Things moved quickly after that. RMOC's new interim board, with Cecilia Vance serving as interim president, reached out to Harlan within the week. The settlement offer was straightforward and comprehensive. The chairlift special assessment would be reversed for every homeowner who had contested it. The county permit would be formally amended with correct notification documentation. And RMOC would enter good faith negotiation with me for a voluntary airspace easement at fair market value, or, if no agreement was reached, would undertake an engineering review of an alternate chairlift route that didn't cross private parcels. We negotiated for 2 months. In the end, RMOC paid me $28,500 for a permanent airspace easement above my property, and the chairlift schedule was amended to exclude Sunday mornings before noon. My family gets quiet weekend mornings again. Dot made pancakes the first Sunday after the agreement signed. We ate them on the porch. The cable was still. Luther slept in a patch of sun by the door. The county's permit review concluded that the original permit had been issued based on materially incomplete representations. RMOC was required to submit a full amended permit application, a process that took 4 months and kept the chairlift offline through the entire winter season. The construction contract with Denton Foss's company was reviewed by the interim board and referred to the North Carolina Real Estate Commission for investigation into Marjorie Foss's conduct as a board fiduciary. The contract had been awarded at a price approximately 18% above the second lowest bid. The state review found sufficient grounds for a formal disciplinary proceeding. Under North Carolina law, HOA board members carry genuine fiduciary duties to the homeowners they serve. Breaching those duties through self-dealing isn't just an ethical failure, it has consequences. The Asheville Citizen-Times ran Patel's story on a Thursday. The headline was measured. Haywood County HOA dispute raises questions about mountain property rights. The article was read by 22,000 people in the first 48 hours. It was shared in a dozen Facebook groups dedicated to HOA disputes. 2 property rights attorneys in Raleigh contacted Harlan after reading it, citing the airspace easement issue as a gap in how mountain community HOAs were writing their CC and Rs. Harlan told them he was available for consultation. He said it without any particular expression, chewing his peppermint gum. But I noticed he bought a new khaki jacket that spring. On the day after my settlement signed, I went out to the workshop and uninstalled the 4 speakers myself. Put them on the shelf next to the old tools on my grandfather's hooks, under a canvas drop cloth. The workshop smelled of sawdust and motor oil and cold mountain air coming through the siding. Luther sat in the doorway and watched. I stood there for a moment, looking at the covered speakers. "Good run," I said. "The best outcome from all of this, the one that made the whole thing feel like it had weight beyond my property line, came out of the spring membership meeting, the first one under Cecilia's interim leadership. The new board established the Ridgecrest Mountain Heritage Scholarship, $2,500 per year, funded in part from the recovered overpayment on Denton Foss's construction contract, awarded annually to a Haywood County High School student pursuing a degree in land management, environmental law, or civil engineering. Burl donated the first year's contribution personally. He wrote the check at my kitchen table, using a pen he borrowed and didn't return. That following spring, Dot and I sat on the porch on the first Sunday morning the chairlift ran under its new schedule. Late start, quiet morning. The chairs moved overhead in the clear air, passengers enjoying the mountain view. This time, there was a document on file at Haywood County, recording that I had been properly notified and fairly compensated. The cable still caught the light the same way, but it felt different, because it was different. My grandfather built this place to last. Turns out, so did the rest of us.
$28,500. That's what they paid Weston for the airspace above his own bedroom. The airspace they took without asking. But the money isn't the point. The point is page 218. One document sitting in a public records file the entire time. A file anyone could have requested. Forced her name to something that wasn't true, and that signature is what unraveled everything. Weston didn't outlaw them. He outprepared them. He documented from day one, learned the one law that applied to his situation, and wait until he has a full picture before he moved. That's the whole playbook. Here's my question for you, and I mean this genuinely. Have you ever been in a situation where someone with a little bit of authority pushes you around, and you didn't know you had more power than they wanted you to think? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. If this story was worth your time, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to HOA Stories. More cases, more outcomes every week. Weston's grandfather built that cabin to last. Turns out, so did he.